So so the Q&A space has gotten a lot of attention lately. Like Quora sort of is very hot right now, and at least talked about a lot. And so how do you think about? I mean, do you think of them as a competitor? I guess first.
Not really. I think that when you say Q&A space and you just say, gosh, everything with a question mark.
I mean, there was. So I guess the history, right? There was answers, and I don't know. There were a whole bunch of these things, and I guess Ask sort of at some point was never really.
There have been a whole lot of Q&A sites. The
Yahoo Answers, of course.
Yahoo Answers is sort of the granddaddy. I think a lot of American VCs went over to South Korea and saw Naver, where there was an incredibly successful, incredibly deep, incredibly broad horizontal Q&A site that succeeded so well in South Korea because there was very limited content available in Korean. At the time that the internet and broadband hit South Korea, everybody, 30% I think have broadband in their homes, and there was just no content in Korean. It was all in English or, other languages. So Q&A made sense to generate content very, very rapidly. So it was successful there, and a lot of people said, hey, why wouldn't that work here? And they made these sites sort of based on the idea that you type something with a question mark at the end of it. Yahoo Answers, of course, is the biggest
Yahoo
one.
Answers is very popular. It's
still very popular. If you look at what's going on in Yahoo Answers, it's a different kind of question. It's usually, it's chat. It's teenage chat, essentially. The demographic there is teenage girls. The chat is very fast-paced. The idea is to come up with a funny question, which is why it's so entertaining. Sometimes
it's not, for that reason, it's also not really evergreen, sustainable content or something that people want to come back to.
Right. Even when it is evergreen, the quality of the answers is absolutely abysmal. So nobody wants to find Yahoo Answers in the search results on Google because you get usually a one-sentence gibberish answer. It's not peer-reviewed. It's not. So.
Do you think that's so? Is that intrinsic just to does that just happen because that's the demographic they have, or is it a risk that all Q&A sites face that you sort of have the chat room phenomenon of AOL? As you get bigger, you sort of get.
I think that the Yahoo Answers people were a little bit surprised when they ended up with that demographic, but I do believe actually, and the reason they ended up with that demographic is because a lot of teenagers were leaving MySpace because they were getting stalked by grumpy old men. And so they went to Yahoo Answers where they could be somewhat more anonymous and still hang out after school on the internet. But and it's completely accidental. I don't think Yahoo was happy about this. But in reality, I believe that when you are designing social software, every single tiny decision you make, even the tiniest of decisions, the size of fonts, the positioning of things on the page, what buttons do, how things respond, how things work, every tiny decision you make is going to massively, massively influence the type of community that forms. Massively. I mean, really, really big differences between the culture. And I noticed this in the 80s between the difference between Usenet and CompuServe forums. And the only difference in the software that was really noticeable was that on Usenet, when you replied, by default, the previous person's article was quoted, and that led people to intersperse their nitpicky arguments sentence by sentence in somebody else's argument. And in CompuServe, when you hit reply, you didn't even see the original person's response. So you had to write sort of a cohesive standalone paragraph response, and you could just tell the culture was utterly and completely different between these two forums that were talking about the same things, like how to get your video card to work. And that was the first tip-off that I had to the fact that you really have to pay attention to every single tiny aspect of the functionality of the software, and you can get radically, radically different communities.
Yeah, you guys have on Stack Overflow kind of a series, you have sort of badges-like things, but it all sort of takes kind of a serious tone, and that's.
We have a bunch of badges. We have a bunch of.
You do a lot of things to kind of make it
reputation-based things. Yeah.
Don't you do a lot of things and also what we call it social grooming, encouraging people to ask certain types or deleting questions and things like that, right?
Yes.
I mean,
correct. The site has its own norms and values, and we perpetrate that in various different ways. One is through the software itself and through the badges and through what things you're allowed to do at what times, but also just through the idea that there's a highly engaged community that hangs out with us and that provides the governance for the site. The moderators are all elected by the users themselves, and that kind of governance structure determines what the values and ethics of the community will be. And so, for example, on the cooking site, they decided no recipes. And they decided this because there's no right answer to, can I have a recipe for X? There are multiple recipes, and voting doesn't make any sense. And there are a million recipe sites on the internet anyway, so this would be duplicate content. And they wanted it to be a site about cooking technique, not about trading recipes. So they decided this rule, and they made this rule, and they enforce it strictly. And now they have a community that has a 100% answer rate. You could ask a question about cooking technique. on the cooking site, and you will get an answer, and it will be good enough that somebody will upvote it. So our rule for an answer is not anything, but an answer that is upvoted by a third party.
Yeah. So bringing up the cooking, there was an article on TechCrunch, I think last week, arguing that it was like "Why Joel? Why?" or something. It was titled. It's very provocative.
I'm so sorry.
It's like, I think
Have I disappointed someone?
I think you disappointed someone on the internet, believe it or not. But I think the argument was that you should stick to professional topics, I guess, like programming, like things people do at work, or look up stuff at work, or something. Like, and I guess partly the argument was that's your business model is around jobs. I don't really, but can you? I think the argument is basically don't do cooking.
Don't do cooking. I think that we don't have a choice of what sites to create. We tried that, picking what sites we should create, and it didn't work so well. And if I had to pick what sites to create, we actually did come up with, I'm trying to remember, at one point we picked the first 4 we wanted to create, and they eventually got created, and I think 2 of them failed and 2 of them succeeded. We're not so good at figuring out what our community wants to talk about. And the way I see it, I could make a site for, let's say, video editing, which we don't have a video editing site. And I would say, video editing is an awesome thing to talk about in the Stack Overflow format, so in the Stack Exchange format. So let's make a Stack Exchange for video editing. Nobody would come, and they would have no reason to go there. And I don't have a video editing audience, except for those guys in the room over there. So I can't do that. What I do have is a gigantic audience that right now is mostly programmers, but also IT people.
Like you'd like, for example, medical if you had doctors.
If I had doctors, I would love to have medical. Yeah, that would be a great thing.
For whatever reason, doctors don't do Q&A right now.
Well, maybe they will eventually, but now they don't. I don't have that audience of doctors. They might be somewhere else on the internet.
Yeah.
So I take the audience that I have, and I ask them, what else do you want to talk about? And we do that through a process called Area 51, where we wait until we have a critical mass of 200 people that we trust are really going to participate because they're already active on one of our sites. And when we do, we allow them to create a new site on a new topic, and that almost always works. Mm-hmm. So the sites that get created, 3/4 of them are kind of geeky. Some of them aren't. I mean, we have cooking and photography, which are relatively less geeky, but there's sort of a surprising number of sites on, obscure technical topics. And that's okay, because that's the community that we have. And eventually, I believe that our community is getting larger so quickly. I mean, Stack Exchange is growing 50% in December, 40% in January. So it's growing really, really, really fast. And eventually, I think we'll get to the point where we have this very, very large community that will eventually cover all the topics that work in our format, which is not every possible topic.